I'm Matt Robinson. I'm a community musician and have been for 17 years, working all over the place. I'm a white male, I'm in my 30s, I'm from Northern England, and I can quite normally be found with quite scruffy hair and a beard and black t-shirt and glasses when I'm working, much like today. For the last 3 years, I've been working here at Concerthaus Dortmund, a world-class concert hall in Germany, creating and establishing a brand new community music program and department within this classical institution. The first of its kind here in Germany. Concerthaus Dortmund is an Echo concert hall. It's one of 23 most prestigious concert halls in Europe, and it also happens to be located in one of the most diverse and poorest areas of Germany. In our neighbourhood, in the Bruckviertel and Nordstadt, Dortmund, 71% of the residents come from a migrant background, 23% are unemployed, and 58% of children live in or are at risk of poverty. So we have two worlds living on top of each other. Over the last 3 years, we've been successful in establishing ourselves as a little team and have worked with over 9,000 people in our community music projects, despite Corona and all that. But as we continue to build, we get stuck. We get stuck when advocating for our work. In a country and in a sector where community music is an unknown, relatively, how do we convince funders, decision makers, potential stakeholders, partners, and even colleagues to not only come along for the ride, but also to be avid supporters? We know as community musicians that this work is good, but how do others? So to kick off this round table, I'm going to share the questions that come to me multiple times every single day. Firstly, what is your aim for community music? Or to borrow, I think it's Pete's phrase, what is the change you want to see? To be confident in what is to come, we as community musicians need to clearly define what it is we are aiming for in ways that are understandable to people outside of our world. What is the change? What will it look like? How will we know when we're there? How will everyone else know? We need to do this in ways that are concrete, countable, open to analysis. We need to be able to express our aims in ways that are clear to all, but especially decision makers, gatekeepers often outside of our day-to-day work. So we want you, whoever you are, rich person, to fund community music with so many €1,000s, and as we strive to make X, Y, Z change in our community. And this is why we are confident that firstly, it will be successful, and secondly, that there is no better way to achieve this change. Stories and advocacy, more often than not, tell a story or a participant's path through a sometimes well-defined progression route. They are useful, massively useful, and an important part of our reflective practice, but these are stories of journeys that have taken place. They're not fixed points on the horizon. They're not clear goals that we know we will reach, and we will know what it looks like when we get there. How do we know that that story, no matter how wonderful it is, will be replicated? Secondly, why do we believe it works? Why do we believe community music works? If you ask someone that has participated in a community music program or project for a significant amount of time, they'll hopefully say that they've benefited from it in some way. But this information is of limited value without factoring in the number of dropouts and people that haven't continued to participate. I'm reliably informed by a Concerthaus benefactor that I talk with quite regularly that this kind of data is a statistical mistake that used to be quite popular in drug registration studies. I'm sure we all know those. Whereas in the past it was possible to say that the measurement of whatever after 12 weeks showed an improvement of X over baseline. However, this data is seen as outdated because without an intention to heal assessment, which counts all the volunteers, so all your participants or potential participants, not just those that participated in the study. Of course, they're going to say it's great. We, of course, then have stories, case studies, advocacy from hundreds of people that have benefited from community music. But where are the dissenting voices? No field is perfect, and a tendency to view one as such leads to a lack of credibility. It's simply too good to be true. Does everyone that comes into contact with community music get inspired, become more active in their communities, and go on to live happier and healthier lives? Or whatever it is we're claiming to do. And if not, then how many? How many people don't? Finally, why do we believe community music is the best way to achieve these goals? Community music is not alone in trying to achieve the aims we're regularly pitching. So why should a decision maker support community music over other concepts which promise a similar outcome? What succinct reasoning do we have? Why isn't community music the better method compared to dancing courses, painting, social work, the local football club, NGOs, or whatever? In the end, whether we like it or not, we're all competing for the same pots of support, pots of money. So how cost effective are we? What kind of investment is needed to inspire a community? Is it 100 euros? Is it €1,000,000 to achieve the change that you want to see? And then what would it look like when we achieve it? And what's the chance that you won't? How do we know that we will change the world and do so in a way that inspires confidence?
The presentations in this session explore ways to build support for community music. Should our arguments be based on human rights? Should they be based on finding the right evidence in order to satisfy funders? Should they be based on stories? Or should they be based on the belief that community music can change the world? For the last 10 years, I've been working with cultural and educational institutions all over Germany, including the Konzerthaus Dortmund, to help them include community music in their work. In Germany, community music is still an emerging field. Therefore, my work has been very focused on supporting organizations in developing community music. In doing so, I've chosen to work on changing the way organizations think about themselves, not on convincing them through evidence. I've done this by helping them to reflect on their purpose in society, for example, their duty as a publicly funded organization to provide spaces and resources for everyone. I wanted to convince them of their role in supporting the concept of cultural democracy, the human right to participate in and actively shape cultural activity. Matt, Pete, and I had an experience recently with funders of the Konzerthaus Dortmund who wanted to see evidence that community music works in order to, so they said, justify funding it. Advocacy often uses evidence to convince others of its goals. Many believe that if we only had good enough evidence, we could convince others of community music's value. This raised some interesting questions and thoughts. Providing evidence that community music works, what do they actually mean by works? Collecting evidence is not a main area of focus for many community musicians. There's little convincing evidence available for the German context. We had collected many stories and a lot of experiences about community music, but this didn't seem to be the kind of evidence that the funders wanted. Can we solve an ideological problem with evidence? Kearney writes that public policy is not and never will be evidence-based. He writes, treat evidence-based policy as one of many contested phrases masquerading as self-evident aims. The phrase suggests misleadingly that we can solve ideological debates with evidence. This is what happened with the question from the Konzerthaus Dortmund's funders. They did not buy into the ideal of cultural democracy, so they asked for evidence to prove the effect of community music. I chose to convince organizations by helping them to reflect on their purpose as an organization, not by talking about evidence of impact. So how do we convince the people and organizations we work with to support community music on an ideological basis? I want to share some final thoughts. If we must collect evidence, what kind of evidence can community musicians collect with their skill set? What evidence do we need to critically reflect and improve our practice? And what evidence do we need for funders? Being able to argue on multiple levels and appropriate to the audience in order to make oneself understood, this isn't easy when one's main expertise is in community music practice. Doing it and talking about it are two different things. Being proactive in terms of our relationship with funders and decision makers, not just responding and adapting to funding conditions, but actively seeking dialogue with funders and decision makers in order to influence them. Understanding the different lines of arguments and how decisions get made will help identify the best way to convince others. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Pete Moser, a community musician, composer, cultural activist, performer, and one-man band. I'm white, older male with short hair and a greying beard, a smile and blue eyes. I've been working internationally for many years and in Germany for the last 8 years. And after discussion in Dortmund, I committed to research around this area of evidence and advocacy. The conversations were fascinating and inspired me to become involved in this session. For 25 years, I was part of the leadership at More Music, a community music organisation in the north of the UK. Within our sector, we were determined to believe that our work delivered the promised outcomes. We needed to prove this, and if we asked the right questions, the replies flowed. Evaluations, anecdotes, photos, films and creative output all supported our desired narrative because we selected those that confirmed our proposals. At the same time, we did use the conflicting evidence to help us improve our work, and reflection was always a key. However, there were times when I was asked to prove with figures that our outcomes have been achieved. European funding schemes, local authority regeneration departments and lottery funders are supporting projects that include housing supply, road building, community infrastructure and training, alongside cultural work. How do we, with our community music programmes, match their data? As the son of a statistician, I searched for opportunities to prove with numbers, but never with a real passion. Now I've been challenged again, and in response interviewed people asking about data and evidence gathering. Carol, the programme director at Youth Music, who used lottery funding to support programmes for young people and to produce important evaluation reports around inclusion. Kirsty Gillen-Thomas, head of evidence and learning at PHF, Paul Hamlin Foundation, who have been leading funder for social and education focused programmes. And Eilish Fleming, Grant and Learning Manager at Spirit of 2012, who have embedded research and learning around their impressive health and wellbeing programmes. From the delivery side, I talked to Simon Glenister, who has built an organisation and a vein of work around data-driven evaluation and reporting. Mary Allison, Evaluation and Monitoring Director for Make Big Noise, Systema Scotland. And Jess Abrahams, who is both a lecturer in community music and also the current chair of Sound Sense, the UK's network for community musicians. Finally, I asked Professor Lee Higgins at the ICCM and Professor Graham Welsh from UCL to gain an academic perspective. I was hoping for some conclusive opinions. It wasn't that simple. Key findings from all sides were: improve, not prove. Whatever you gather, the aim is to improve what you do rather than prove that you are doing what you promised. There is huge trust built between funders and their clients and interest in dialogue and learning. Well-being. This is the easiest outcome to assess through data, though it relies hugely on self-assessment unless you're working with a very digital approach. There are a range of tools in the UK and also across Europe that allow for comparisons between projects and for enough data to be collected for significant learning. Educational achievement is also quite easy to gather, but less relevant for our sector. Proving need. With funders and delivery organisations keen to focus on redressing imbalance using a variety of available social statistics, it is possible to direct funding to where there is less cultural activity. This is where data is useful and also easier to find. Baseline assessments or measuring distance travelled. There's no great agreement in this area because, again, a great deal relates to unreliable self-assessment. When enough data is collected, however, the outliers don't stand out. This is for discussion. Social change, community development. Well, there is an agreement that this is an area where it is hard to prove impact from a single project. Community change is influenced by interventions from agencies, institutions and family relationships, etc. And so make it almost impossible to point to one project when looking at actual data. In the UK in the early 2000s, there was funding from local authorities for programmes that followed the race riots and focused on interaction across different ethnic communities. Proof of impact could be seen in new mixed attendances at sessions and events, but in the long term, this was only one of the significant interventions. Stories rather than data. Well, when the methodology is rigorous, stories are good, if not better than statistical data. Stories are data and can work hand in hand and back up the thinking and learning from figures. All of the reports that I've gathered in this research use a combination of the two to show the impact of the work and to support change and improvement from both funders and the organisations they support. So we need to continue to gather a variety of measures and try not to get too caught up in other people's agendas. It's crucial to understand the change that any programme is focused on and also use the most creative ways to share and tell the story. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Francois Matarasso. I'm a community artist, researcher and writer based in France. I'm currently working on a European-funded project called Traction, which is developing community operas in Spain, Portugal and Ireland. I'm a white man in my 60s with short hair and glasses. Evaluation has become a dominant preoccupation in participatory art in the past 20 years. It's an important subject, and I've played a part in its development, though my ideas haven't always been understood as I expected or intended. Today, I worry that approaches being used to evaluate the arts, and especially community art, are misguided and sometimes damaging. To explain why, I need to go back to first principles. Evaluation is undertaken in relation to a goal. So, before we can consider how to evaluate community music, we need to be clear about its purpose. Unlike Matt and Pete, I do not believe that community music projects exist to change people, communities, or the world. That's often a consequence of their existence, a result of the work, but it isn't their purpose, which is a matter of human rights and social justice. Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says that everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community and to enjoy the arts. Community art exists to make that promise, ratified by most democratic states decades ago, a reality for the millions who cannot participate in the cultural life of the community because they're poor, oppressed, marginalised or subject to other forms of social exclusion. It matters because without the right to cultural participation, people are denied the capabilities to flourish as human beings and to choose what they want to be and to do with their lives. People who don't have the right to cultural participation risk losing their other human and democratic rights because they have no legitimate voice or visibility. The fact that public bodies responsible for cultural policy and spending don't recognise this, as is evident in their policies and spending decisions, is the best argument for why the work of community artists is needed. The idea that the way to redress this inequity in cultural life is to accept additional goals is understandable, given community art's political weakness, but it's also wrong for several reasons. First, because it places additional requirements on those who have fewest resources. It also distorts the value of artistic experiences by giving them utilitarian goals. It's wrong because it legitimizes the idea that some people are entitled to change others without their knowledge or consent. It also turns evaluation from a discipline of creative learning to one of accountability, control, and enforcement. And finally, it's wrong because it traps community art practice and the already marginalised people it aims to empower into institutionalised subsidiarity. The theory and practice of evaluation and how it applies to the value of participation in the arts is an important, fascinating field. But it isn't neutral territory. It's defined by existing and unfair power relations between different sections of society. It's dangerous to engage in these debates when that means accepting rules designed to protect the status quo. This is not a level playing field, nor is the referee impartial. Rather than play an unfair game, I believe that community artists, community musicians, need to engage in a political argument to defend the universal human right of cultural participation. That's not to undervalue the positive outcomes that can flow from that participation, but to say that unless we start from a claim of equality, we risk embedding inequality into arts practice at the very moment we believe we are reducing it. Thank you.